Great. Very warm welcome to those of you who are already into the lobby or in from the lobby. We've brought you into the main event, and just sort of do welcomes over the next couple of minutes just to ensure that those who are joining us are able to get in. We got 155 registered for this afternoon, which I think is fantastic news that there's that many people out there across the sector who are wanting to engage with the topic that we're looking at today. So we'll do some introductions as we go through. Just to say, for anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Dan Campsall. I am the chairman at Agilysys, and I am going to be facilitating the conversation today, sort of sharing us through. And the reason that we are doing this webinar this afternoon is because we put out a questionnaire, a survey to the road safety sector over the course of the summer. I'm hoping that a good number of you who are on the webinar this afternoon did participate in that, share your information in that, because what we were trying to gather up was some insights and some understanding about the capacity that we have within the UK road safety sector at the present time to be able to move towards safe system implementation in an effective way. And so we were really grateful that we secured significant support from a whole range of partners who believed that that endeavour was useful and valuable to us, something that hasn't been done for a little while. And I think, I'm guessing that those of you who've joined us in the webinar this afternoon are also interested in exactly where we are up to and what some of the issues are that are facing the UK road safety sector. So there's still some people coming in, but I think it'd be useful for us to do some introductions. So delighted to have with us this afternoon Davies, the Executive Director of PACTS, and also joined by Research Director here at Agilysys, Tanya Fosdick. So they're the experts in the room who are going to answer all of your questions, I'm sure. And my just to try and sort of facilitate the conversation. But as I said to them earlier, I might not be able to entirely stop myself from expressing an opinion or two as we go through. What we're going to do is Tanya is going to give us a presentation of some of the kind of headline results from the survey. We only closed it a few weeks ago, so there's undoubtedly still more analysis for us to do, and there'll be some more results for us to publish later when we've done a bit more kind of cross tabulation and a bit more of a deep dive into that. But we wanted to kind of get out there with some headline results nice and early and start to talk about some of the issues that arise for us. And so this webinar is part of a series of 3 that we're going to be doing together. The first one really focusing on the kind of national picture. What are the key learnings that we take away? What are some of the key challenges that face us and some of the opportunities that are there in front of the sector at the moment? Then we're going to do a panel discussion next Tuesday at the same time, where we'll start to take a little bit more of a granular look at the sort of components of the safe system and where we've got particular sort of strengths or challenges in some of those. And then the third session, we're going to particularly ask, and what does the profession need to do to move forward? And we're going to be joined by some of the professional associations and ask them, what's the requirement in terms of training, professional development? How do we join forces to ensure that we are more fit for purpose as a profession as we move forward? So a very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us. As you all know, because I'm seeing some pretty familiar names on the attendee list today, the way that we like to do these things is quite discursive. So please do add your questions into the mix as we go through, and we'll try and sort of feed those in to our conversation as we go through. If you're relatively new to Teams or actually not recognize that Teams has introduced a change, there is now a Q&A function in Teams. So as this is done in webinar setup, you've got an extra little button on your ribbon at the top, which says Q&A. So that's a place where you can add your questions for the panel. If you simply want to add some commentary, want to add to the chat, then the chat function is still there. And do you know what? If you want to throw in some emojis and reactions at the same time, feel free to do so. But just as we dive into our content for this afternoon, we thought it might be useful for us to, or for me to give a quick explanation of what the SAFE system is. Now, I know that a good number of you, this will be quite familiar to, but we felt that it was probably useful just for us to have a kind of working definition, and then for that to be the framing of our discussion together. So here on the screen in front of you is a model of the SAFE system. There are many that are out there in existence. This one is something of a hybrid of a variety of the models that you might see, including the one that if you go to the PACTS website, which I do heartily recommend, pacts.org.uk, you'll be able to find on there. But this is a bit of a hybrid where we brought together sort of the key components that sit across a variety of the models. But fundamental to the SAFE system is the idea that people make mistakes, that we recognise that human fallibility is just a key part of our use of the road network. Not everyone is perfect all the time. We sometimes have, we do have mistakes and errors that slip in, and we need a system that is able to accommodate. We need to recognise that humans are vulnerable to injury, that there are certain forces that our bodies cannot sustain, and as soon as energy within the system reaches a certain threshold, then injury will be sustained, and at a certain point that becomes quite severe. So we need a system that is able to accommodate those forces. The SAFE systems dictates that death and serious injury are not acceptable. So we cannot have a system which is designed around points of failure that result in people being killed or seriously injured. The system has to be more robust than that, and has to deal with that accordingly. SAFE system recognises that responsibility is shared. So the kind of classic view of road safety historically has often been that, well, it's all down to the road user, isn't it? They just behave in a certain way, then they'll keep themselves safe. Whereas the system recognises that actually in this systemic view, road designers, operators, maintenance, and users all have to kind of work together in order to ensure that the SAFE system can deliver those safe outcomes. Our approach is proactive, so we don't wait for things to happen. How many times have you heard, sort of on the news or something, or this is, we're just waiting for death to happen at this junction or whatever. The SAFE system is proactive and recognises where there might be weaknesses in the system and seeks to address them up front. And our actions are systemic, so we don't just operate in silos. We are thinking about the ways in which all of the actors within the system and all of the functions within the system can work collaboratively and collectively in order to deliver the safest system possible. So those are the kind of principles that sit at its heart. As you will see in many systems from around the world, there are then a number of components within it. Within this wheel, we've got 6. We've put road safety management in as a discrete function. There are some who regard that as the roles and institutions that are represented in the outside of the wheel, but we sometimes think it's worth highlighting that proactively managing the road system is an integrated discipline amongst some of the others. So we've kept that in there. Safe roads and roadsides. So we need the infrastructure that we operate on to be up to standard. Vehicles that have good quality safety systems that are continually developing towards that safe system goal. Road users who are competent to navigate the system and compliant with some of the system rules that are necessary to keep them safe. We've got safe speed in here as an independent component within the model. Some models don't explicitly have speed out there, but fundamentally the safe system is about managing kinetic energy, the energy that an object possesses when it's in motion. And so the speed at which things move within that system is fundamental to how we manage it and how safety is experienced. So that has to be included in our view. And crucially, post-crash response as well. Again, there are some models that don't have post-crash response, but things like emergency response, capacity and trauma care, collision investigation, and our responsibility towards victims do have to be there, we think, if you can have a fully rounded systemic view. And then round the outside of the model, you've got a bunch of mechanisms. As I said, this is a hybrid of a number of the models that are out there. And what we've done is actually looked at some of the international literature and grouped some of these operators and synthesized those from the international literature. So, one of the things that I think frustrates me often is that when I hear people talk about safe system, they just talk about the pillars or the components, i.e. things like safe vehicles and safe roads. Whereas actually the systemic view comes from recognizing that we need leadership and coordination. We need to have good quality design and engineering, and these things need to work collaboratively and collectively to deliver a system that works. So that when we're talking about safe system, that's the view that we're talking about. But without further ado, I am going to hand over to Tanya, who is going to take us through the headline results from the survey, and then we'll get into our conversation. Tanya, over to you.
Let me make sure I'm sharing the right slide deck. Hopefully that is now loading. Perfect. Can you see that, Dan?
Yeah, that's great.
Wonderful. Good. And I've got my buttons and everything. So firstly, we couldn't do this, or wouldn't have been able to do this survey without the support of all of these different organisations. They helped us with designing the survey and with disseminating it. So yeah, a big thanks to all of the different partner organisations who have been involved. And I think it's their support really shows how important this is to have done this survey, this kind of health check of where people are in terms of safe system thinking. So the results I'm going to share today, we had 129 completions. But we also had 169 additional responses from organisations who didn't fit into one of the listed categories, the organisations that we had selected. Many of those were from the third sector, who really obviously have a huge role to play in safe system thinking. For this particular year, we wanted to concentrate on those who have a responsibility to deliver road safety. So local authorities, police, fire, partnerships and transport authorities. But I think we will really look to extend the question set out next year to include charities and private sector, because understanding their views and where they need support is massively important as well. There are also an additional 329 individuals who attempted the survey but didn't complete it, which is quite interesting to, perhaps try and find out from some of you why you didn't carry on and press finish to these questions. Perhaps that's something you can come back to us on. So let's have a little look at some of the results. So local authority participation, by far this was the largest group of respondees across 9 regions of the UK, 74 different authorities. And you can see here the wide mix of their roles, from engineers and managers, road safety officers, and whereabouts in the country they came from. As well as looking at here, what we've got is some top line information on some of those budgetary questions and organisational questions. We really wanted to understand where people were in terms of the size of their team and the size of resource. But I don't want to dwell too much on this because, we've got some really interesting results to come on to in a moment. Just looking at where local authorities tend to have in terms of area of focus, it often is education and active travel. Quite a few doing analysis and engineering as well who were involved in this. And I think just thinking back to what Dan's just said with the safe system wheel and the elements involved, you can see here that there is some areas where local authorities tend to concentrate potentially more than others. Similar in terms of police force participation. So again, we've had forces from across the UK, although none of Scotland and Wales. Again, their reporting of their funding, and we'll come on to that in a moment, is included in here. Many of them were managers, traffic management officers or analysts, which given the people that we've often spoken to over the years, I'm not surprised that we've got quite a few of our analyst friends involved in this survey. So again, in terms of areas of focus, ranging from traffic management to analysis, as we've just said, quite a lot on road safety education, leading on enforcement and management. Fire and rescue. tend to be very southern for some reason. We seem to engage well with the south of England here. So far fewer fire and rescue participants in here, tended to be from management or community safety. And again, when it comes to their areas of focus, we've got mainly education, community safety, and some analysis and management in there. We also had responses from particular, distinct road safety partnerships. Again, not massive numbers, but there were about 7. Again, these are from around the country, and looking at here the different range of, I can't actually see some of the notes on there. The range of responsibilities here is kind of a little bit more systemic. Transport authorities, here we're talking about National Highways, Transport Scotland, Go Safe Wales, etc. So, and obviously we can't forget TFGM and TfL. So we've got 4 of those large transport authorities who were involved in this. So let's get on some kind of more interesting, rather than worrying about who we were engaging with. The idea of this survey really is to understand the state of play. So one of the key questions right at the beginning was about whether or not people had a road safety strategy, and actually it was really positive. Over a third here have, or around a third, have got an up-to-date strategy that they are delivering upon, which is really positive news. Another 10% have got an up-to-date strategy, but they don't always adhere to it, which is quite interesting and may come up in some of the discussions later on about the importance of strategy and working towards it. Another 20% have got a strategy, but actually need to work out how to deliver on it. Again, it's really easy to have a strategy on a shelf, but what does that mean in action? And again, I think that's something we're probably likely to discuss. Then about 22% are in the process of developing. So we've got almost 15% here who are the minority here who haven't got a strategy or not developing a strategy, which I think is really positive news. This thinking about the safe system and a strategic direction. Those who are involved in this are really thinking in those ways. And what do these strategies include? Well, actually, many of them, nearly 50%, have adopted a Vision Zero goal, which is brilliant and very much aligns with safe system thinking. And actually 40%, because we allowed people to pick multiple selections here. So 40% have adopted that UN target of a 50% reduction by 2030. Whilst about 12% have got a different casualty reduction one to the one above, so either a different percentage or a different target date. However, 18% have no targets, which is quite interesting. And another about 20% have got safety performance indicators. So we could have a strategy here that has got the Vision Zero goal, the 50% target, and safety performance indicators in place. So in terms of how people work, thinking again about that systemic approach, we wanted to find out how people were collaborating with others. So this question was about asking whether or not people were involved in a partnership, and if so, who were members. So the majority are involved in partnerships. Only 14% were not part of a partnership of some sort. And you can see here the list of the different participation levels of the different organisations. So, for example, almost all of these have got police and local authorities at the table here, but some of the others are a little bit lower in terms of organisation. However, we've got the participation. What we also wanted to say, you've got a partnership, how well do you actually work together? We're pleased to say that most of them do appear to collaborate well and communicate well, which is obviously what we'd want to see. So we touched on funding right at the beginning on some of those other slides. What we wanted to do was kind of bring together here what the state looked like by the different organisation types. So any dark bar going down shows a reduction in funding in the last 5 years, either capital or revenue, and any lighter bar going upwards is where there's been an increase. So we can see here local authorities really have been the hardest hit. Fire and rescue service have lost both capital and revenue budgets. And actually partnership revenue is not as good as partnership capital. and also with the transport authorities, that their capital has gone down, and actually they felt that their revenue hadn't changed. So really the only place where funding has improved in the last 5 years is within the police forces, and with capital and revenue budgets. Whether or not that's linked to NDORS funding or some other PCC approaches, we don't know at this stage from this. So we asked what people's frustrations were in terms of delivering in road safety. And again, we've got those ups and downs lines here to say whether or not people agreed or disagreed with things. So one of the big frustrations is lack of funding, which was supported by that previous slide. But we've also got lack of support from government, limited time and resources, and a lack of strategic guidance as being things that they agree are their frustrations. However, when it comes to collaborative working and support from other people within their team or in supporting activities, organisations, actually they didn't agree that those were areas of frustration, which is again a really good place to start with. Those local relationships are really positive. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but we asked an open text question, which we're going to come on to analyse in a lot more detail when we kind of have got some more time to really pull apart these results. But this is a word cloud. We asked people in, I think it was no more than 200 words, what does safe system mean to you? So many of the things that Dan talked about at the beginning are reflected in this word cloud. But we just picked out, kind of grouped some of the responses together. So the larger the text box, the more respondents said something that kind of related to that category. So boxes on the right are kind of the most positive and the most accurate, that people really did have a strong understanding of the safe system imperatives and the idea about shared responsibility, being proactive rather than reactive. The ones in the middle are kind of close. But actually, yeah, there is a little bit more that could be done. And then we've got, yeah, a little bit more knowledge there. And then we've got the ones on the left where actually people really did admit that they hadn't heard of the safe system before starting the survey. That actually is just a rebadging of what we've already done. And what was interesting is that they felt that they didn't have control over the entire safe system. So actually there are elements which are not for them to be involved in. And I think that's something that, again, we'll probably touch on in the conversations. So just to finish up on this kind of top level responses here. Sorry, now I have got a couple more slides. I've just realised. Sorry, this is kind of talking about those levers and the mechanisms that Dan was talking about in terms of influence and where people felt that they could be involved in safe system thinking. And I think that kind of reflects some of those last points there about people not feeling that they have an influence everywhere. So delivery of road safety education and communication was something that everybody felt that they could do. There was a strong response in relation to research and monitoring, and also leadership and coordination of road safety activities. But when it comes to designing and engineering vehicles, having an influence on that, designing road safety policy, even designing road and engineering roads, there was a much lower level of involvement in those levers, and also lobbying for better road safety standards and training. So that's interesting. For some reason I'm not skipping forward. Right, there we go. So just kind of jumping, we've looked into the pillars in a lot more detail, the safe system elements, and again that will come out in the report. But just to kind of lead the conversation here a little bit, we then asked people what support they would request when it came to looking at, safe system approaches and what they may need. You might not necessarily be able to see the quotes on here, they are quite small. But what we got here is we've grouped them in this spider diagram about where they would feel that they require more support. So you can see we've got investment, and actually on standards and training is where more support was required, whereas education, they didn't feel that they needed quite so much there. So the fact that, perhaps they feel that they're doing enough in terms of education, but there is some requirements for safe system training here. And actually that fits with this last slide that we've got here about what their future ambitions are. And actually, even though we've got a large percentage of those who have got an up-to-date road safety strategy, we've got over half here who would like to develop and create a new road safety strategy. They want to develop and monitor targets, look at improving analytical content, think about taking safe system training, improving partnership working, even though the partnership working looked pretty good in the survey, developing capacity in the team and embedding the safe system approach. These are all really positive. So I'm hoping that's a really good kind of way to end the feedback of the findings, that, you know, yes, there are some elements of concern from the survey, but actually I'm hoping we've got some kind of future direction in there.
Great stuff. Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that, you know, when you ask questions from a committed and motivated profession like we have in road safety, there is ambition to do more. You know, there are people see the challenges, there are frustrations, but I think in amongst the data there, it does indicate that there is also significant ambition and some opportunity as well to harness all of that appetite and all of that motivation. Great. Steve, if you want to also highlight David, that would be great, because what we really want now is sort of bring the discussion together. And thanks for those who've already started to ask questions, but I'm sure there are going to be many more that start to drop in over the next half hour or so as we discuss these things. So where I wanted to start is, I guess, around the question of strategy. Is one of the first slides that Tanya presented. About a third of road safety organisations say that they've got an up-to-date strategy that they're delivering on. I was just wondering what you think, how much difference you think a strategy makes in terms of being able to move a partnership forward, or indeed a country for that matter. David, I wonder whether I could bring you in to start with.
Absolutely. I should dispel the myth of your generous introduction that I'm an expert, but I'm happy to be asked and happy to contribute. I think a strategy does matter a lot. There is a saying, however, that a strategy is really only as good as the organisational culture, and having the perfect strategy which nobody really understands or lives by or implements is a waste of time. So, you know, strategy and culture, I think, go together. But I think having a clear statement of what you're trying to do, how you're trying to get there, is really important. It hasn't got to be hundreds and hundreds of pages, far from it. I mean, the new roads policing strategy, I think, is essentially 4 pages, but it does, map out what they see as important and where they're going to focus. And for government, it's really crucial, because if there is something in a strategy, it gives the various civil servants the ability to go to point to it and say, right, we are doing this, funding that, supporting that, because it's in the strategy, which has been agreed by ministers and hopefully by ministers from a range of different departments. So a national. So we were hoping there will be the road safety strategic framework published by now. It was scheduled for July and then cancelled officially anyway because of the extreme heat. We will have to see what happens under the new government, which inevitably is rethinking things. But a strategy is absolutely important, and I think it matters locally as well. I'm sure it matters locally, because there are plenty of other strategies, and you have to compete for your place. And if you don't have a strategy, it doesn't look very convincing. So, yeah, I mean, sure, it matters.
Great, thanks. And we can argue your expertise over a drink sometime. I'd love that. For those of you who don't know PACTS as an organisation, I have to confess a particular interest. I am the vice chair of the board, but David has done a superb job of leading that organisation for the last 10 years, and he brings a huge amount of expertise to that. So yeah, he's being very humble, but we're very glad that you're here as part of this conversation. Tanya, David raises an important point, doesn't he, which is around the difference between having a strategy and implementing a strategy. And I think that's one of the things that you drew out in the analysis as being one of the challenges. What do you see are some of the kind of peculiar challenges of getting from something on paper, a direction on paper that people acknowledge and agree with, into the implementation stage?
Yeah, from working with a variety of partnerships, it's definitely the implementation that's the issue. We can agree on the content of a strategy and have a lovely looking document that sits on a website, but actually it's about changing, as David says, the culture and the actions, and really understanding how to galvanise around that strategy. I think one of the difficulties is there isn't a safe system playbook. There isn't a guide on how to implement things in the UK at a local level. And so I think it's been interesting to see some of these partnerships testing different interventions and approaches. But perhaps the biggest challenge is not reverting back to where they were before. Not going back to silo working and thinking, you know, this is the way that we've always done things. So, you know, regardless of that strategy, we'll just carry on. So it's being brave, I think, and trying new things, talking to partners, talking to others in the region who are perhaps that little bit further ahead about how what you can implement, what's within your gift, and who else you need at the table.
That's interesting. So, I mean, you know, you've done quite a lot of looking at where local authorities or local partnerships are at, and some of the strategies that they're developing. Are there any sort of particular areas where you feel like there's a need for them to sort of grow their capacity? Are any components of that safe system model where, you know, there are identifiable gaps that come up again and again?
Safe vehicles, post-collision response are the two tricky ones. They are outside of the 3 E's kind of thinking. And therefore, generally, there is nobody at the table that represents safe vehicles. And there seems to be a bit of a challenge in understanding how to bring safe vehicles into the mix. So who do we need at the table? What role could we have? And so it's thinking, I mean, we're not going to move to creating a safe system in a local partnership area tomorrow. So it's about those incremental steps as well. So can we start with our own fleet and thinking about the star rating in the vehicles that we purchase at a local level? Can we advise on purchasing for our local road users and what might be best for particular different types of people, you know, older road users versus, you know, what's the safest car for your teenage child? So I think that's one of the things is just actually not dismissing it and saying it's all just down to the vehicle manufacturers. There is a role for partnerships to play there. Post-collision response is an interesting one because we're obviously pretty strong in the UK on post-collision response. We, in comparison to other nations, we have a dedicated 999 number. We have trauma centres, but that doesn't mean that we can't do more. And thinking about that longer term post-collision response, rehabilitation, investigation, victim support, all of those things are things which can be done at the local level as well.
Yeah, and there's some great examples of that, particularly around the kind of victims trusts, etc., who are working very collaboratively in some of the partnerships. I was going to come on to the question of sort of vision and targets. I think Lorraine has set us up quite nicely with her question. So she said, for local authorities, police and others, capacity and capability is an ongoing issue. How best can those committed at a local level make a difference within their organisation under increasing pressure and constraints, with limited senior buy-in? And I guess where I was going to sort of use that as a bit of a segue is, you know, sort of how do we get senior level buy-in? How do we use that, David? I think you started to sort of point to it. You know, how do we use that strategic direction and that setting of vision and get the political leaders and senior leaders within organisations to really articulate that and to set the direction?
Well, I think first of all, play to our strengths. And I mean, I've been to two essentially policing conferences in the past month where senior police officers were absolutely showing leadership. You know, Chief Constable Joe Shiner from Sussex, who's the National Roads Policing lead for NPCC, and you know, she could not do more really to say this matters. And then we've had other senior police officers like Andy Cope now at Lincolnshire, really mapping out clever ways of targeting particularly dangerous drivers, getting them off the road, that sort of thing. So, you know, the why and the how. So I think the police are doing a great job, and we're really keen to see the government publish the response to the roads policing call for evidence. It's long overdue, and we really want roads policing to become a strategic policing requirement. And maybe now the Stop Oil protesters will persuade the Home Secretary that that's a good idea. But I think we are in a difficult position with ministers at the moment, as you it goes without saying, really. But yeah, I think there are people who sticking their necks out, including many local authorities and partners who've responded to this survey. Saying we've adopted Vision Zero, we've got a target, even though the government has no target, we've got a target. So, let's highlight the successes. We've seen police and crime commissioners, I think, increasingly say roads policing and road safety is now a priority for us. So yeah, I think there are some good examples, but we need more to follow, and we definitely need the government a clear statement from, I would say, the Secretary of State that the level of death and injury on the road is not just one of the best, and we don't have some of the best roads in the world. That's not the point. It's still a totally unacceptable level of death and injury, and they want to significantly bring it down.
Absolutely. Tanya, one of the things that you presented within the data was the number of partnerships actually who have not only adopted Vision Zero, but have also set themselves a specific quantitative casualty reduction target, typically 50% by 2030. Given that I think it was 40% of local strategies you said included that as a target, given the sort of flatlining that we've seen over the last decade, how ambitious do you think that is, or indeed how realistic do you think that is? And I just wonder your views on the sort of the scale of the challenge in front of us to realise that kind of target.
I mean, there's no doubt it's ambitious, but strong targets do galvanise people. In fact, it was PACTS research from a few years ago which showed that countries with targets tend to perform better because it galvanises everybody around it. So we've got committed leadership, and we have resources that are then dedicated as a consequence of having that target. And it also helps with the public discourse. So yes, it's ambitious, but perhaps it's better to have an ambitious target than no target at all, because it will allow us to commit those resources. Yeah.
So the argument is, if you aim for the stars, you might hit the moon. But I guess politicians sometimes are reluctant about those sorts of commitments because they might get held to account. And I guess that therein is something of the challenge that we've lived with for the last decade, isn't it? Is whether leaders are willing to be accountable for targets in case they're missed, and therefore it looks like a poor performance on their part.
Vision Zero has been a harder sell than a 50 by 2030 target, certainly, because for exactly that reason of, if we never get to zero, it's going to be our fault. We can't get there, so we're going to be held accountable year after year for not getting to Vision Zero. So for some partnerships, it's actually not been a place they were able to go.
Yeah. I was wondering whether I could bring in Paul Brown's question. So he's asked about, is there a national document detailing what interventions have been done as part of Safe System Vision Zero? And I know that's one of the things that you mentioned before, Tanya, was, actually we don't necessarily have the playbook to lean on. But David, I was wondering whether, you might have some sort of thoughts on what are some of the key barriers in front of us, or maybe some of the key opportunities if we are going to realise that ambition of getting to a 50% reduction by 2030.
Yeah, I mean, could I just comment first a little bit about the whether 50 by 30 and so forth is realistic and all the rest of it. And I mean, I agree with what Tanya says. It is ambitious, but if you actually look at the figures, we're not miles away. And when Scotland set its ambition to have the safest roads in the world, initially I thought, well, that's pie in the sky. And then you look at it and you think, well, actually, they're not that far away from Norway, which is the best. And although we've been talking about plateauing, it hasn't stayed static. It has been a decline, so not as fast as it was before. So all those things. I think if the government had set an ambition, they could have reached it, and it's not just pie in the sky. Zero, I agree, is a much bigger but it is a vision, and I think we keep having to remind ourselves it's a vision. It's not an absolute target, or at least that's how I would see it anyway. Are there some quick wins or some major areas where yes, I mean, I absolutely think there are. I think working with employers, given that about a third of deaths on the road involve people driving for work, there's an awful lot that could be achieved quickly and effectively through working with employers, organisations, involving the health and safety executive and so forth, because it's an awful lot easier to work with a limited number of organisations which have power over their drivers, if you like, than the great unwashed British public. So I think there's opportunities there. I think on a small scale, we could do an awful lot more to improve seatbelt wearing. Many of you may have spotted in the September publication that 30% of people who died in cars last year were not wearing a seatbelt. Now that's the highest figure recorded, and it's recorded on the basis of more cases recorded. So it's likely to be more accurate or less. That's maybe 200 deaths a year, and there's a lot of things, not earth-shattering, but a lot of things that could be done to bring that down. I think the other point I'd probably say is working together. So there's no silver bullet. There's no one measure, whether it's education or speed cameras or drink drive enforcement. But if you put them all together, then they're hugely more powerful, and that's where I think the partnership working is really good.
I was at a road safety conference in the US last week. I just stick a little humble brag in there or something. But one of the things that was interesting, we're talking about sort of safety performance indicators and the degree to which we get compliance with road traffic rules. And one of the examples that was given was in Sweden, when they do random breath tests. Actually, the levels of compliance are incredibly high. I mean, sort of 99 point something percent, and yet, amazingly, the proportion of fatal crashes that involve a drink driver. So often, we can shift the dial a long way, but it's some of those last little bits that make a real difference in terms of driving down the casualties, and that's where we might not have the sort of the low-hanging fruit that we've talked about in the past, but we nonetheless need to continue to drive forward in areas that have been traditional domains of road safety where we have made great progress. Tanya, I wonder whether I could come back to you. Davies just kind of pushed us in the whole direction of partnership and collaboration being a key aspect. And I mean, it strikes me that the safe system sort of necessitates us dealing more seriously with complexity. We can't just do the silos of education and enforcement and engineering and think that that's sufficient. We need to understand more the interactions between urban planning, infrastructure design, vehicle safety systems, and how people use those road networks. Do we have the right people around the table at the moment to really help us to move forward, particularly in dealing with some of those more complex challenges?
I think we have some of the right people, but as I said earlier, there are definitely stakeholders and partners who are not necessarily there. And this has been the challenge for some of those who we've been working with in developing strategies of who's missing and who else do we need to get there. And that includes the road user. So coming back to shared responsibility, and also thinking about resources and actually they have a role to play in the system. Not only it's their actions, but also what can they do to help deliver. But I think, yeah, there is a real need to sit down and map out who are the actors within the system and who we need at the table. And it might not be that they need to turn up to every partnership meeting and become bogged down in a massive, great organisation. But it is about ensuring that actions aren't delivered in silos, that if we are thinking about post-collision response safe vehicles, road design, well, how do we ensure that we're doing all of this and it's compatible with what our partners and stakeholders elsewhere in the system are doing?
Yeah, thanks. David, anything you want to add to that in terms of who's missing from the debate? I mean, you talked about securing coordination across government in one of your earlier answers. Are there others that you would want to see added in?
The Department of Health, I think, absolutely needs to be brought back. I think in the early days when PACTS was formed 40 years ago, the doctors, surgeons who were seeing, terrible cases of injury in their A&E departments, they were there at the forefront, and they're so besieged for the problems of delivering on 4-hour waiting list or whatever. They're not engaging so much, but so that's a challenge. I think it's very difficult getting through to the the ambulance trusts, because they're under such pressure. But we must certainly try and do that. And health and safety executive, health and safety. I think that that has moved forward. It has taken a more positive attitude towards engaging in transport for work, driving for work recently, but could do more, and that will be helpful. I think there's reasonable progress being made with the Home Office and on the roads policing front. We wait to see. So yeah.
I guess one of the things that this brings into view is the next sort of topic I was going to go to, actually, which is around funding. I mean, I was talking to a colleague who works in an emergency surgical unit earlier today. They've just been ascribed responsibility for an additional 12 beds. I mean, they can't do professional development within the health lane, let alone, thinking about kind of what they're doing outside of the acute medicine point of view. They are stretched, and their ability to sort of see something like road safety as an area of priority is limited. I was wondering whether we actually we need to think differently about the way in which we fund services, and whether there are things that we could do that would, as we've done in the past. I mean, when we set up road safety partnerships in the UK back in the early 2000s, we did some quite innovative things. Lincolnshire, for instance, brought everyone under one roof, police, highways engineers, working much more collaboratively. Do we need to think a little bit differently and more systemically about the way that we bring professions together? I don't know whether either of you want to comment on that.
I think there are loads of opportunities. Some of the regional working that I've seen, so partnerships, are great and bringing together, within a police force, but actually amalgamating up to a regional level allows best practice sharing, economies of scale. So, when we did the work on motorcycles in the East a few years ago, we found 39 different educational interventions. That's not the best use of money. Let's find out which of those work, which of them is most effective for the right target audience, and procure them together rather than us all individually developing and delivering things. And I suppose that comes onto the other side of it, of actually the use of evidence and evaluation. What works? What should we be investing in? What perhaps we need to find out more evidence about? I think there are massive opportunities for best practice sharing and economies of scale.
Yeah, great. So Tanya, I might just stick with you for a moment, because some of the data that we presented, or you presented, was about changes in funding, and it seemed to indicate that there were, in some places funding had stayed the same, but there were also some areas that had got considerably less than in previous years. Now, that data looked only after the last 5 years. It looked out for the last 5 years, after which austerity had already cut pretty deep. I wonder how well resourced you think local authorities, the local setting is to deal with the challenges of taking a systemic view.
Obviously, it's from outside of the survey and from working with authorities, but I think some of them have adapted really well, actually, over the last 12 years, and thinking about how differently to approach work, and kind of make the best of those tighter resources. So it's thinking about what the team does and where the responsibilities lie. But it is a challenge, and it remains to be, a lot of lost services out there. And I think we've seen over the years, analysts disappear because that was a too nice to have, but that's a real issue if you're trying to monitor progress, and direct resources effectively. So I think there have been swings and roundabouts really in the last 12 years in terms of finance. Some have performed better than others. Maybe that comes back to that leadership question again as well, that if locally there is buy-in and support, then those services will have been protected. In other areas, it hasn't been quite as successful.
David, one of the things that seems to still be a very strong element within local delivery is education. I read your blog piece that you did for Break the other day, where you were quite provocative in that space, and I guess challenging us to think differently about how we manage behaviour within the SAFE system. I mean, do you think we're putting the investment in the right place with the limited funding that we've got available to us?
I think that's a good question, but I mean, it's not a dodging the answer. It's not a dodging it. It's I don't know exactly how the money is spent. I mean, I thought your survey was very interesting because education came out as the activity was most ticked by participants, but that may simply reflect who answered it, and the fact that everybody feels they need to do some education. It may not be where the bulk of the money is spent. Yes, my blog piece was deliberately provocative in a way because I want to see education in its context, in its role, which I think is a really important one. Has to be there, but on its own, I think it struggles to deliver actual behaviour change results. But as you, in your response, quite rightly pointed out, you put it together with other stuff, and it makes sense. It's much more potent. So. Fundamentally, I think people can change their behaviour. We've seen that dramatically over the last couple of years with COVID and all sorts of other things. So, working from home has happened and so on. Are we spending money in the right place? I mean, I just probably not, but I think that's difficult to know because we don't really have clear information about the totality of the system. We asked Department of Transport this a while ago, and they said, "Oh well, as long as a piece of string." Really, the answer, what do you count? What do you don't count? Do you count active travel money? Do you and so on? But I'm sure the answer is no. We're not spending enough. And I think one of the big challenges for Safe System is to demonstrate that spending it in a Safe System way delivers better results for the same amount of money. Because it's easy to say, well, yeah, this is what we should be doing, and we need shed loads of cash to deliver it. I think in most cases that's not going to be feasible, and we've all local authorities have always been hard up, and I don't see that changing fundamentally in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the conversations that I've had with what I might describe as some quite enlightened colleagues in transport safety is saying actually the funding is the funding. What's there is going to be there for different parts of us delivering the transport system, and we've got to look to get the most co-benefits that we can out of what we're investing in active travel, in public transport, in road safety, in highway engineering. But that's where the value of thinking systemically is going to deliver more bang for buck, because anytime we're looking at integrated transport solutions, urban mobility, urban planning, we're thinking about the safety element within that. So yeah, I think it's one of the big challenges. Whilst we're on money, Nicola has asked a question, and there's a big if in this one. Nicola says, if the money promised in the mini budget remains, and we've seen obviously a number of U-turns on elements of the mini budget. If the budget remains for the IRAP identified schemes and these proceed, I can see from the initial meetings I've had that we really need this opportunity to start each scheme with a briefing about Vision Zero and the Safe System approach. I wonder whether there's anything that you'd like to sort of do you agree with that? Do you feel like actually Safe Systems really kind of sufficiently embedded, or actually do we need to use moments like this in order to be more, I guess, evangelistic about the Safe System and Vision Zero to get people on board and see the value of the money that is being spent?
It's a great opportunity, isn't it? And if it was as a part of the financing of these schemes, it came from government that this is what it's about, rather than the individual authorities saying, hey, we're going to take a Vision Zero approach for this. But it's a real opportunity this is within a Safe System approach that we are doing this. Then that's great. That's some of the leadership we've been asking for, isn't
it? So I'm aware of a time we're sort of coming towards the end, sort of 5 minutes or so left. So we might have opportunity for another couple of questions. And one of the things, Tanya, that you brought out from the data were frustrations. And there was a bit of a contrast here between the internal and the external. Internally, personal ambition, motivation, support from team seem to be very high, but some of the kind of external factors, leadership, strategic guidance, funding seem to be the more major causes of frustration. I mean, is that just the kind of result that we ought to expect to see, or does that say something about the structural challenges that we face? And does that feed into, I guess, your sort of challenge earlier, David, which is that, you know, we need to see national leadership as well as local leadership?
I think it's reflective of that. I think locally there appears to be a bit of a movement from below, that practitioners, partnerships are saying, hey, right, we're going to, you know, grab us by the horns and move forward ourselves. And so we're going to set what we think is best practice, and we're going to lead this debate. So actually, that does show that there's a high level of passion and coordination within those teams. And it's almost because there hasn't been the leadership from above that that they're doing that. But it does mean that there has to be a meeting at the middle at some point, because they can't do it on their own. They can't change legislation. You know, there are things which cannot be done at a local level, and I think that is a bit of a brick wall we're going to come across, as you know, probably quite soon.
David, anything you want to add on that?
Well, I just like to say, actually, I really welcome this work by Genesis. I think it's really important. PACTS is very supportive of Safe System, but even more so supportive of turning it into practice. You know, some wonderful principles and ideals and so forth in Safe System, but I think we are still desperately short of practical guidance, tools, guidelines, all those sort of things, and knowing what to do with the limited amounts of money. So I think these bits of research and these webinars are really useful. We're pleased to be part of it.
Right. Well, we're very glad to have you part of it. And as we've already done a shameless, you know, sort of self-interested plug for our various LinkedIn profiles, we're really glad that there are so many people who seem to be wanting to engage with this topic. You know, thank you for your participation in this webinar. It's worth saying that this is only, if you didn't catch that at the beginning, this is only the first one of 3. So over the next couple of weeks, we've got 2 further sessions. Next week, there will be a panel session where we'll be starting to take a little bit more of a deep dive into what's going on pillar by pillar or component by component within the Safe System. So Tanya is going to be back next week in the chair. I don't know whether that's a promotion or a demotion, but she's going to be doing that. And then the week after, I will be back to facilitate a conversation with some of the professional bodies, thinking about what are some of the things that we need to do to support the sector and the profession as we go forward. If I could just also take an opportunity to answer a couple of other questions that have come out. So there's a question about whether the slides from today will be available. The recording from this will be available straight away. And there's a few bits that we're just going to add in to the slide deck from today, which we will then sort of publish as a kind of brief report on the findings of the survey overall, and that will be out by the end of this week. So we'll let you know when that comes. But please do make sure that you're signed up for those future webinars. I guess what I wanted to do, just as we sort of come into land, is look to the future with David and with Tanya and say, you know, there was lots of interest expressed by the respondents to the survey about continuing to build capacity, continuing to improve partnership working, wanting to embed the Safe System. I guess I wanted to give both of you the opportunity to sort of say, you know, what do you think are the things that we need to do to move forward and that will really kind of allow us to make some significant strides?
So I want to revisit the survey and I want to explore some of this in a little bit more detail. So really pull apart that funding, as you just said, the capacity issue there. What do people actually need help with, so that we can really come up with some concrete recommendations and some guidance there. So I think as a first pass, this has told us an awful lot, but it's left me with lots more questions. So revisit the survey is what I want to do.
So Dan, you're asking what we would like Agilysys to ask further about. Okay, so I mean,
what should we do together, David? Not just
we together.
what should Agilysys do?
Okay, right. Okay, touche. I think I'd like to promote success. So, it's easy, and I totally understand people answering in a sort of rather frustrated way. Although I thought actually the survey results were very encouraging in many ways. I was really quite heartened by it. But let's try and find out what's working and promote that side of it. And I think some of the partnerships, I'm really impressed with what they're doing. They've got indicators, they've got partnership teams, they've got communications. They are working, with the ambulance services, with the health services, the people I thought were hard to reach. So let's highlight that, and the good leadership we're getting from some sectors.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you both ever so much for your contributions today. To those of us who've joined us online, thank you so much for your questions, for your interaction. Let's keep the conversation going, because this is too important for us to leave here, and we'll be picking it up over the next couple of weeks, as I say. But there's a huge body of work for us right across the sector to engage with together, and we look forward to partnering with you. So enjoy the rest of your weeks, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks very much, and goodbye for now.